Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. I am Mary Cornell, Chair of the Tech Commission, and I wanted to welcome you to the Data Privacy Forum, sponsored by the Information Technology Advisory Commission and the Emergency Preparedness Advisory Commission, chaired by Sharon Valencia. And Sharon is with us as well. So we're delighted to have this distinguished panel joining us this evening to discuss data privacy, and we welcome all of you. I'm so glad that Arlingtonians have joined us to discuss data privacy. A few logistics before we meet the panelists. If you have a question for one of the panelists, please write your question in the chat box, and Dr. Michael Cornfield, who's one of our Tech Commission members, will take note of your question and relay it to the presenter. So make sure and put your questions in the chat box, and you can do that as we hear the presenters. So we encourage you to ask questions throughout the program.
Well, that didn't take long. We've got a question already.
Good. See that? Excellent. All right. So the panelists, we have Jack Belcher, who's the CIO of Arlington County, the Chief Information Officer, Dr. Costas Torrega, Director of Cybersecurity and Privacy Research Institute from George Washington University, Dr. Dan Kiefer, Computer Science Professor from Penn State University, and Yo Deshpande, Technologist for the Public Realm, Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, and City of Boston, Massachusetts. And we're delighted to have all of you here. This is such a wonderful panel and have so many different perspectives. So the panelists will make opening remarks, and then we will field questions. So Jack Belcher from this Arlington County, if you would begin. Thank you.
Okay, can you all see my screen?
We can.
All right, let me get into PowerPoint mode here and get going. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today and have this discussion. It's an important discussion to have about privacy. I have to start right off the bat by saying I'm the technologist. This is a bigger issue than just technology. Technology plays a critical role in defining privacy issues, but it's not all there is. And it requires really a comprehensive effort to look at it from all sectors. So saying that, I want to focus, Mary's asked me to just give you a brief understanding of what we've been doing in the county, what's driving us, and hopefully I can keep it within 10 minutes and we can move on to the other presenters and get some questions from you. So with that, let me start off. One of the first things I think we have here is that this is not new. This is that persistent discussion about individual rights versus the good of the community. And, I was trained as an historian at my alma mater, Georgetown, and got into technology and very familiar with all the works that have been written about this. But this started way before today. And I listed here John Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, with the whole idea of the social contract, states' rights versus government mandates. We see it today. We saw it last Sunday. A huge rally taking place on the mall and people saying my individual rights are being compromised. And what are you going to do about that? And so we're very concerned about that, very, very interested in seeing what that means. And we see a dichotomy here. There's a right to individual rights and your privacy, but government needs data and information to be able to serve its constituents in a good faith method. One of the things we've done, we'll talk a little bit about this at some point, is an innovation zone we've created in the Clarendon area. And what we've done is engaged a nonprofit company called US Ignite. We're working with Comcast, working with the Commonwealth Cybersecurity Initiative out of the governor's office, where we've got professors from George Mason and Virginia Tech involved, validating what we're trying to collect and do. And we're involving into a public-private partnership in terms of what we can do to improve our ability to do emergency management response in that particular area, and to seeing how that might progress. So the question was, what have we done here in the county since the COVID? And frankly, that's where my attention's been for the last 22 months, is to make sure we have virtual access to not only education, but courtrooms, being able to do contact tracing, that I get a workforce that's mobile and being able to continue to provide services. Well, we've done a lot. In summer 2020, we put up a new open data portal, made it simpler and easier to get information that we have in the county. Fall of 21, we put up a brand new website. The idea behind it is to refresh it, make it easy to use, make it easy to get information. Fall of 21, we also published privacy principles and laid those out. And just this last week, we issued an inventory and mapping of our county privacy policies. And we have a number of them. And if you go to the Arlington County website, arlingtonva.us, and put in the word privacy, it'll give you a listing by department of what we've done in terms of privacy policies. It is not a county privacy policy. We do not have one at this point in time, but we've done those things. And what I've done is give you examples of what they look like, the new website. You can see it there. I'm just going to breeze through those, and you can go look at it yourself at your leisure. We have a brand new open data portal, which rather than just getting a list of data files, we actually allow you to peruse those, decide where the data came from, and how can we use it. And I should point out that none of the data we put out there is in any way sensitive data that we've made available. It's all publicly available data. As I said before, we've come up with privacy principles, and you can see them listed here, and they're very simple. Minimal necessary data we're collecting. We're ensuring quality, transparency. It's very important that we're transparent about what we have and what we're offering, and the whole question of stewardship, making sure that what we is put up in a secure and a manner that can be protected. Here again is the map of our current privacies, and you see they're listed by county policies, department policies, and if you were to scroll down on the site, you see state and federal policies as well listed. Okay, so what are we doing? How are we moving forward? Well, we're enamored by the approach that the National Institute of Science and Technology has, and they call it the NIST Privacy Framework. Now, that's a big word, but what it is really a tool. It's a voluntary tool. It's not a compliant tool. You have to do it, and it doesn't suggest how to do it. It just says these are issues you've got to discuss, you've got to address, whether it being identifying where that information is, recovering it, responding to any threats that may take to it, be assigned to it. So we've adopted that. The privacy framework is rather new. I think this January it became 2 years old. That's how new it is. So it's not something that's been around for a while, but it's a good tool and we're using it. And we'll talk a little bit about it now. We as a county, we're faced with the challenge between cybersecurity, securing our assets, making sure access to our data is protected, and privacy. And I have to be honest with you, when asked where I was going to make the investment, the manager and myself decided to make it into security. And we've done a great job in terms of securing our enterprise. It used to be that we'd have staff sitting in front of screens looking at attacks. We've now got partnerships that are looking worldwide in terms of any incursion that takes place here. And they alert us that this is happening, and they also give us guidance on what to do to prevent our data center and our data being compromised. So think of it as, instead of thinking in human terms, the human speed, we're thinking in internet speed. And it's been a great resource for us. But I think now it's time for us to take a look at what the privacy side, and we're gearing up and we're doing it as fast as we can. And here I got an example that came from the NIST model, and you can see that privacy and cybersecurity overlap, and those overlaps are where we've been focusing on. What keeps me up at night is getting a call saying that we've just been compromised and the county's data is now on the dark web, and if I could make a payment of so much money, I'd get it back. That could happen. And now we're finding out that it's not just us and others that are a threat, it's our citizens, our residents who use our services. And we want to make sure that our employees are well aware of the threats we face and how can we address it. So talking about the cybersecurity and this privacy, it has three components, major components. One is the core. In other words, you identify your objectives. What are you trying to achieve? What are the outcomes you hope will make it work for you? Developing profiles. That's how active do we want to be in terms of how we collect that data and use that data that's being put into these, being covered by the privacy plans we have. And then implementation tiers. And one of the most important things that add, the components of that, of course, is having a privacy-aware workforce, that they know that these are the privacy policies we have, and this is how they're working, and here's what we need to do about it. Going forward, areas of development and alignment and collaboration. As I said, we've got an inventory and a map of where data privacy policies are in the county, but it has to be continually improved and worked on. Well, the next step is a taxonomy of those policies and principles. Simply knowing what we know, these policies are very explicit. They talk about things we should be doing, and making sure that everybody in the county understands where the overlaps are and what are we doing, and to create this privacy risk assessment that we can say, what are our threats? Here's where technology really plays a role. Emerging technology is hitting us every day, and it's growing. So what we thought we had done well could change tomorrow. So we talk about de-identification opportunities may exist. And so we make them, and we make sure that information is not being compromised. It could be something like a camera, video camera. And saying we're making sure we know those cameras are, and we're making sure they're not collecting information they shouldn't be collecting. But with the emergence of the cloud, with the emergence of artificial intelligence, we're going to find very rapidly that what we thought was safe and private may not be. And so we're going to have to go back and say, where are these risks that we're seeing, and how do we take care of those? And lastly, again, as I said before, we want a privacy-enabled workforce, a workforce that understands what the privacy concerns we have of the community. How do we get there? Well, it's a journey, and there's no easy way to it. I'd like to say that at the end of this meeting, we will announce a policy. It won't happen. And it can't happen just from a technology perspective. This has got to be a community engagement to say, what do we want? And you might say, well, everybody's done it. Boston's done it. Seattle's done it. Why don't we just take it, do a word search, and just replace Boston and Seattle with Arlington? Because Arlington's different. You have different values that we're trying to live by. And so we have to find out what that is. And it's got to be approved not only by us, the people on this call, but our elected officials and the community in general. What motivates us, I think, is this last slide that this comes from this. Only 31% of Americans are comfortable that their personal information is used in ways they're comfortable with. If you think you're not being monitored, go to a website where you don't have to pay for access, it's not secured. You can guarantee your data is being taken and used, your behaviors, whether you're searching for this or that is happening. And so what we're trying to achieve is a holistic approach, and that's from compliance to strategy. What are the ethics we're applying to this, data governance, and then making sure that we're doing everything we can to create this robust, protected environment here. So with that, Mary, I hope I've kept it within 10 minutes, and thank you for your time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jack. And I'm sure there'll be many questions. And that was a great frame. So thank you so much. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and we will get to them. We'd love to hear our next presenter, Dr. Costas Torregas. And thank you so much, Costas. We look forward to hearing your perspective and your experiences.
Great. Thank you very much. Can you see my screen? Just checking.
We can. Thank you so much.
Great. So thank you very much for inviting me to share some ideas. As you see from the screen, I'm the director of the Cybersecurity and Privacy Research Institute at George Washington, just across the river from you. And many times have I enjoyed my trips to Arlington, far, far away. I want to, first of all, applaud the two committees that have come together of residents that want to engage in this topic, because it is indeed an important topic. It's also very timely. I'm sure that you're aware that this week is Data Privacy Week. And what better way to celebrate Data Privacy Week than by engaging citizens with some presentations and hopefully a lot of questions and answers. Also checking, did my slide change?
Could you see the change to date? Yes, to Happy Data Privacy Week.
Very
yes,
good.
Thank you, and thank you
All
for flagging that, Costas.
Well, I'm sure you had planned it years in advance. So I wanted to pile on what my friend Jack Belcher, that I haven't worked with for more than 15 years now, but we had some interesting times together, pioneering some ideas for local governments and technology back in the 90s and 2000s. Privacy is not a technology issue. The technology, the CIO, the technician can only, and I put it in quotes because it's a hard job, help implement something else. I would be aghast if you listened to Jack tell you what the privacy should be. Privacy is not something for the CIOs. Privacy is something for new groups of people to engage. So I'm going to try to help you, at least with my perspective, of how do you enter and how do you create a framework for privacy. I have 3 words, so I put them in an Escher triangle here. One is privacy, the other is security, and Jack has already shown you how it's a balance between privacy and security. But I'm going to put the 3rd one up there, which is called empowerment. Over and above privacy and security, there comes this idea that data and information and the applications that process the information allow people to do things. And by the way, what I feel about what data and information and applications allow me to do is very different from my 35-year-old son. He feels much more different. If I asked him, put a pin next to the part of the triangle that you feel most comfortable with, he would go to empowerment. I'd probably go somewhere closer to security and maybe with some empowerment and maybe with some privacy. But my point is that space is different from every single one of us. So that makes it very different to ask for what shall we have as a policy. I'm going to use a popular example. From time to time, we watch Midsummer Murders, we watch Vera. All these are, for those that are not aficionados of murder mysteries on TV, they're police detective stories on TV. And the most vital word we hear is there CCTV? Did we get the CCTV? And all of a sudden, we're at the edge of our seats hoping that whether it's the inspector from Midsummer Murders or the Vera from her show, that they found CCTV that would pinpoint the murder, that would show that someone indeed left at 2:30 in the morning from their house. Boy, oh boy, were we happy that there was CCTV footage. Well, the reality is that we have these things not just on TV, but every day. We have ankle bracelets, we have drones, we have AI-based applications, we have CCTV, we have closed-circuit TV. And the question is not, do we have it or not? It's all over. The technology exists. The question is, what is the framework that makes us more comfortable? So here I come, and perhaps when your elected officials hear this video, they might wince. I think the elected officials have a huge role to play. In this little diagram, you see thousands of people, and they're all queuing up through a single portal, and that portal we call elected officials. In Arlington County, I don't know how many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people are represented by a single board member. That awesome responsibility to empower the voice of so many with different opinions and different perspectives to come through to a reasoned discussion of a board is very, very important for the privacy discussion we have. In my mind, the most important thing to start with is civics. Civics courses in K through 12 education. Why? Because we need to make sure that the new Arlingtonians are in fact men and women who understand privacy, understand security, understand empowerment. And I don't like to have lots of words in a slide, but I thought I would copy one part of this privacy and security curriculum for K through 12 schools. It was done by a professor at George Washington University, Professor Solov in the law school, in coordination with other institutions, IKS and others. But listen to it. Privacy issues often don't have clear right and wrong answers. It is best to provide students with age-appropriate information and then allow them to think for themselves and reach their own conclusions about what best suits their values and comfort levels. Wow, privacy issues don't have clear right and wrong answers. Okay, if that's true for students, it's true for you and me as well. There is no magic answer. We have to kind of slug through and it may be painful, this discussion. So we have legislation throughout. I pulled out GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations in Europe, the CCPA in California, the CDPA in Virginia, my own academy. I'm a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration and chaired a committee that looked at data privacy and security, trying to develop an agenda for 2021. The ITIF, Information Technology Innovation Foundation, just issued a big report urging the federal government to take on the issue of privacy because they're afraid that too many individual state privacy laws or county privacy laws may in fact slow down innovation and increase cost of innovation to industry. So what am I suggesting? And I'm coming to the end of my presentation. It's a structured dialogue. We need to start discussing things with the community at large, just as you're doing today. We need to discuss things with elected officials and all the key stakeholders that we have, because in a sense, we have a very, very unusual journey. And as my last slide, I chose to show you a picture of the Mars rover photograph. Why? Because when we landed that rover in Mars, we didn't know what we're going to find. The rover had to have some intelligence of its own to figure things out as it took the first few steps, or as it rolled the first few feet on that uncommon ground in Mars. It's the process, therefore, not the answer we should look for. And as a consequence, I think you've started. You've been very brave in starting this process, and I applaud you. And I look forward to the discussion in our debate. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Costas. That was wonderful. Thank you. Dan, Dr. Kiefer, would you like to give us perspective about not only now, but some things you see in the future as well?
Okay, yeah. So
we can see your slides.
Okay, great. So thank you for inviting me and letting me share some thoughts. So I don't control the slides. Angela has graciously helped me with my technology issues. So let's please go to the next slide. So a quick intro, I'm a professor of computer science at Penn State University. I work on formal privacy, which is a field that studies unexpected ways that data can leak private information about you. I have ongoing collaborations with the Census Bureau, Facebook, and BLS. And this means I always have to add these kinds of disclaimers in my talks that these opinions are my own. I don't represent any agency or organization or company. Okay, please, next slide. So let's start with the question of why people treat digital privacy differently from physical privacy. So suppose this guy was following you around, taking pictures, recording everything you're doing, peering at your phone, right? So you might have a pretty unhappy reaction to that, to say the least. So next slide. But this is basically what all these online companies are doing. So the only difference really is that they're really good at hiding what they're doing. So you might not be aware of when they're collecting your information or what they're doing, what they're doing with it, and what exactly they have. Next slide, please. And so because they're good at keeping this hidden, a lot of people don't appreciate privacy as much. Like if they actually knew or were aware of when they're on a web page, hey, this is what is being collected about me, this is what it's being added to, this is what you can do with all of that information, right, then people will get more concerned. So the key is knowing what is happening with your data rather than the current state of affairs. So next slide, please. So the main thing to do, and I think Jack had a good start in describing this, is you need to treat data like an asset, like money, right? And so you have to have an accounting system to keep track of it. So if I could have a wish list for Arlington County, one thing is you'd want them to be very good at keeping track of what is collected across departments. So instead of having one department, each department making its own decisions, having some centralized place where you know what is being collected, what services is it being used for, and how long it is being retained. So you don't need to keep all the data forever. This is good for cybersecurity as well as for privacy. The important question is when does your information leave government hands? So this could be when you're paying for a service. Of course, your credit card is going to a vendor to process the payment, but there are also other cases where data leaves government hands, and then you need to know why this is happening. So it's not enough to just have this policy, but this should be in one place, very public, easily accessible place where you can keep track of exactly what is, what data is being collected about you. And this, So there shouldn't be, legalese. This should be plain, understandable English. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so there are many tools that are available. So Jack did a very good job of describing the NIST privacy framework, so I don't need to talk about it anymore. But from the technological side, there's also access control and auditing to make sure that the policies are being followed, right? You're keeping the data that you want to keep and make sure that only authorized people are looking at it. Then there's also cryptography and formal privacy, which are there to make sure that you don't unintentionally leak your private information. The next slide, please. So here's an example of what would happen if you don't have very good policies and if they're not shown up front. So DMVs are a typical example of a government agency that likes to sell data. So this is true in Virginia and a whole bunch of states. So this was a excerpt from an article from Vice. And so you can see that selling personal data is very lucrative. So for example, Florida made $77 million just by selling data from the DMV. And this is just in 1 year. And this data is not very well regulated. So for example, in Texas, pretty much anyone could get access to it. So for example, given their policy of selling it just, let's say, to private investigators, you can have felons accessing your data because they don't have a lot of, they don't have a lot of regulations there for this kind of thing. So the other problem is once, even if there's a legitimate use, like you sell data to, let's say, car manufacturers so they can process recalls. But then what happens when the data is out of their hands, right? What's going to stop them from reselling the data? And once it's out there, right, you have no more control about it. So please, next slide. So the long story short, it's not right for, in my opinion, for an agency to just sell the data or to monetize the people, right? The purpose of an agency is to provide services to the people, collect revenue to provide those services, but not to think of them as walking dollar signs. So once data leaves an agency, you have no control over it. So they have to be very, very careful with the data, what they do with it, and who they give it to you. So there is a technical branch, which is not very well known, but this is formal privacy. And the idea is sometimes you do want a government agency to release data, right? This is for statistical purposes. If you want to do planning, you want to figure out, okay, should I build a headquarters here? Where should I build the manufacturing plants? And so on. So this kind of data, you want to make sure it's only useful for statistical purposes. So you understand what people are doing in general, but shouldn't be detailed enough so that you can understand what specific individuals are doing. And so the tools for this are called formal privacy or disclosure avoidance technology. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think people are pausing by some of those numbers that you shared, Dan. So I imagine there'll be more questions when we arrive at that part of the program. And Yo has slides. I believe Sharon sent them to you, Angela. So if you could check, then we'll have his slides as well, and we'll be able to go forward. So Yo, do you want to introduce yourself, and then Angela will bring up your slides.
Perfect. Thank you. Hey everyone, I'm just still taking in bits from everything that Jack said and Kostas said and Dan said. And it feels like a lot of great connections to what we've been exploring in Boston. My name's Yo Deshpande. I'm the technologist for the public realm in the mayor's office of New Urban Mechanics in the city of Boston. Our team works a little bit differently than the Department of Innovation and Technology, which oversees a lot of the data privacy and cybersecurity efforts going on in Boston. Our team is more of a civic R&D lab, and so I want to talk a bit about what we've been exploring in those efforts. Cool.
Great. And there
Yeah.
we can see your slides. Thank you so much, Angela.
Perfect. Thank you, Angela. That's great. Cool. So I'm Yo, and we'll hop right into it. Angela, if you want to slide down to the next slide. Perfect. Thank you. So to get us started, I feel like we're all thinking about how crucially important data privacy is, and we know that it's important from our own lives, and we know that it's maybe personal for us. And what I wanted to talk about that we've been doing in Boston is exploring how, because data privacy is that personal for everyone, it's crucial to bring everyone in to the process. So there's kind of two cases I want to make tonight. One, that developing a data privacy policy should be an open and democratic process. And second, that any conversation about data privacy is also a conversation about digital trust. So over the next few minutes, I'll talk about what my office has been up to and try to make those cases. So go on, next slide. So my team is the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. We're a civic R&D team. Talked a bit about this. We can go next slide. The kind of projects that we work on have a wide range. We worked on 311, the infrastructure issue reporting app that Boston has, Project Oscar, which is a community composting program, and creating free Wi-Fi zones outside public libraries, and testing autonomous vehicle operations in the city. So a wide range of projects, not necessarily ones that scream data privacy. We can go on to the next slide. Here you see some of the areas of focus. My role is specifically technology in the public realm. And what we found out is that the Department of Innovation and Technology, they're handling digital and technological infrastructure issues, doing 1,000 things every day and doing them excellently. And it's helpful to have some people who can step back and see the wide angle, or pop up to 30,000 feet and look at what the city's doing overall. So that's where we try to live in terms of technology. And I want to shout out my teammates, Nayeli Rodriguez and Chris Carter at the New Urban Mechanics. A lot of the thought discovery and the practical projects I'll be talking about have happened under their tenure. So it might start sounding like some obscure gospel or something, which how much I say. Nayeli once said, or as Chris proclaimed, that sort of thing. We can go on to the next slide. One thing we've been seeing is that from this outside vantage point, the data privacy conversation is becoming more and more widespread, more urgent. But because we're a city and we're an institution providing public services, we're also seeing that it's hard to extricate the conversation about digital trust. There's overlap and there are different processes. So for instance, somebody goes to a governmental office and is filling out a form at a digital kiosk, and the information that they put in is kind of the concern of data privacy. And we can address that with certain securities and processes and precautions. But when they step outside of that office and they walk a dozen blocks on their way home, a dozen city-owned devices might be recording their movements, gathering data about them, and using that to ostensibly improve public safety or city services. So the data that we produce just as citizens, not by engaging with a clear technological service, is being collected and used. And it's something that is beginning to exist in people's understandings, but it's outside of the mental model of data privacy for a lot of people. So you see how it starts morphing from just privacy into a question about transparency and a question about trust. It's one thing to keep the data that the city collects private, but how do we actually let people know that data is being collected, that we're doing it for X reason and we're using it for Y purpose, and how can we make that data open and accessible to them? So we can go on to the next slide. So to start to move this out of the abstract, we'll talk about a couple real world ways that we're trying to see what the data privacy plus digital trust conversation looks like. I'll go through a couple recent projects of ours. Next slide. Thank you. So because we're in Boston, and Boston is a powerhouse of a city for academic life and creative thought, one central methodology of our team is to partner with universities to explore things that we're both interested in and to encourage more civic engagement. So the public data principles that we came up with was a project like this. It was in collaboration with Harvard Law School's Cyber Law Clinic, we wanted to state where Boston's current thinking is, represent the actual conditions, but also say, this is what we believe about data. These are our values. And we'll work from here to create legislation and policy instead of trying to create it in a vacuum. And what we're exploring right now is how to operationalize these, to bring them into the conversations with new vendors and into RFPs and into procurement. Next slide. Another project was a partnership with Brandeis to develop, this is a proof of concept of an app that maps all the data collection devices in Boston and allows users to explore what the device is, how the data is being collected, what it might connect to. This is an idea from Amsterdam. Amsterdam was the first to do this, mapping their data collection devices in their downtown. And this is a proof of concept because we don't yet have an existing inventory of all sensors in the public realm. But it's an arrow for us of where we want to move toward. If we can establish that there's data privacy based on the principles we were just talking about, how can we move to create greater trust through transparency? Next slide. One of the exciting ongoing projects that we've been working on is the partnership with the organization Helpful Places, which has created DTPR. And DTPR is an open source communication standard for all kinds of technology in the public realm, and people can interact with it to learn how data is being collected by technology around them. So we've piloted this DTPR signage that you see on these stickers, on light poles, on a few different kinds of street infrastructure already. And what it does is make it possible for people to see the taxonomy, know what kind of data broadly is being collected, then scan a QR code on their phone and learn all about how it's being used, what for, how it's protected. And we're excited about expanding this out because it feels to us like opening up the conversation of what's actually happening with data collection. Next slide. So Boston City Council just passed an ordinance that our new mayor, Michelle Wu, had originally sponsored to increase city council and civilian oversight on new surveillance technology that city departments use. And coming out of the ordinance, we're putting together a working group to create recommendations and data transparency guidelines for all departments. And we're also moving towards having privacy impact assessments, a process that cities like Seattle and Oakland have been leading on. Another shout out here to Kelsey Finch of the Future of Privacy Forum and to Brian Ray from the Cleveland Marshall College of Law, who are building training programs to help communities understand the privacy and equity impacts of public technology. Next slide. We're also moving more and more towards community co-creation. Basically, how can we get these conversations about data privacy and digital trust out of a single lone governmental office of technology experts to be happening around classroom desks and around kitchen tables? And I think the baseline feels like ultimately we're public servants, and as much as we might think that we're experts on the issues, if we're making it so that people feel uninvolved and that there's a lack of information, we're failing to serve. So what I always think about is informed communities inform their governments, meaning how do we have the conversations in education and decision making in community so we're enacting what people have chosen rather than choosing for them. Next slide. So to summarize some of the lessons that we've been learning, data privacy can't be separated from digital trust, because as soon as we move into the public realm, it becomes more and more a question of trust, where there isn't already knowledge and recognition of how data is collected. And trust is a process. It's a relationship. It's reliability and transparency and goodwill over time. We're also seeing that when government operates up in a tower away from people, it just stokes fear that ultimately degrades trust and degrades the effectiveness of public services. So even when you come with something good, people naturally, wouldn't believe that it's good. So we're trying to be as transparent and open as possible. We're trying to find good partners, meaning external partners, people who care about these issues, and internal partners people who care about the issues in city departments, thought partners who are exploring theory around them, and community partners who can lead in determining what decisions are actually going to best serve people. And the last part is redefining public safety. So when we talk about surveillance technology, oftentimes the argument for a new technology is public safety. And what I really want to emphasize is if we only think about public safety through the lens of lives saved or lives lost and property maintained or damaged, it's missing a huge part of it, the part of it that data privacy really gets at, which is the mental and communal health parts of public safety, how people trust the government and trust each other, how safe people feel going around a city, exploring a new part of the city, engaging with the public service. And that's ultimately what makes people happy and what makes a city good to live in and what makes a government work. So that's what we've been up to. I'll stop there. Thank you all for this time.
Thank you, Yo. Thank you. I love the image of a glass of water, not a, not a black box, and lots of thoughtful ideas for us to think about within Arlington. I encourage, I know some of you have already done that. I encourage you to put your questions in the chat box. And Michael, Michael Cornfield, a Tech Commission member, I will turn it over to you to start asking. I'd like to go to the chat box first, and then we have some other questions as well. So go ahead.
Michael, I think you have to unmute.
Right, unmute, Michael.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can hear you now.
I apologize. I think there's great interest so far in the questions I've read in just what Arlington County has, what it shares with third parties, whether it's free or sold, and in particular among those third parties, what has it shared with the Department of Defense, the DEA, and other federal agencies located in Arlington that have as their special interest surveillance and intelligence. So Jack, you spoke of a map and an inventory, and I don't know exactly what that was referring to, but how far away are we as a county from having a place where we could go? And I'd love to have QR codes on kiosks like they do in Boston, but anyway, if we just had to go to the website to get answers to those basic particular questions. Who knows what about us? What is the current state of affairs?
We don't know, to be honest with you. I mean, that's a good question, an excellent question. We're learning as the work Boston is doing is fantastic. And I just see the processes they're going through, all of which sounds great. I mean, we'd love to be able to say that we know where all the information is we have and how it's being disseminated. As I was talking to Yo's colleague in Boston, the CIO there, I said, everything it says to me, you know exactly what information is being shared, and no one's doing anything that you don't know about. And when she stopped laughing, she said, no, we're learning, we're growing. And I think that's where we are right now. The questions you asked depends on you asked what the mapping was all about, and the identity and mapping, identifying and mapping that I talked about. It lists those departments that have privacy policies built there, available, which talk about what they're doing with the data they have. So, and some of the things you talked about involve public safety. Again, some things they have the right to share through the fact of public safety, and we do the best that we can to identify what they are sharing. But I couldn't give you an answer today, right now, if we where that one repository is. But we're beginning the journey, and I think that's the key thing. Is trying to find out exactly what we have and how that data is being used.
To rephrase one of the questions, I think there's particular interest in individuals who live here or work here or even just pass through here, and whether their personal security, not just their privacy, but their security could be compromised by what is known and what is being shared. anyone can take that. You know, and if any other cities have better ideas
Well,
of what is currently held in their jurisdictions, that'd be great to hear too.
let,
So I
let,
don't want to put this all on Jack.
yeah, well, let me start off because I think, it's you had that follow-up question. We're one of the largest deployments of 5G technology in the United States, and it's going to grow more and more. And the process whereby somebody wants to put a 5G pole up, collect data, they go through a process and they put that up. We don't have a process to say what are they doing with that data they're collecting. And if you have a cell phone and you're near one of those, say an AT&T or Verizon tower or T-Mobile, they most likely are collecting the data on where you're going, what you're doing. So I'd like to say that we've got a hold of that, but we don't. And we're limited in what we can do. In fact, the FCC has made it quite clear to us that the only thing a local jurisdiction can do is to expedite the process whereby a pole can be put up. We do not have the authority to say, what are you doing inside that pole? What type of technology are you putting inside it?
Well, when you say you don't have the authority, who are you referring to? You or the third parties?
The government itself, the county government itself, it does not have that authority. It's really it's part of in the case of the 5G spectrum, what they put up, it's really between the FCC and the parties doing it and putting the pole up.
There's a question for Yo to expand on your concept of public safety, that it's not just about lives and injuries.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think when we think about what public safety could be, I think there's a nice way of imagining a really like the ideal of what could be the best experience for a citizen of Arlington, the best experience for a citizen of Boston is a sense where there's full harmony and peace. And this all sounds very flowery, but I think that the way it can actually play out is in expanding a definition of public safety to include things that maybe traditionally haven't been. The area that I think is really interesting here is mental health and the mental health experience of people moving through a city, because for particularly like people from groups who are historically over surveilled and who suffer more than other groups from like algorithmic bias and stuff like that in surveillance technology, I think there's a felt decline in public safety when just being out in public. And I've heard it in conversations with people, and that moving through a city and knowing that there's some sort of surveillance going on, you feel unsafe just as a citizen, even if the idea of there being that surveillance technology there or other monitoring or other data collection is to increase safety. So I just think that expanding the definition is useful, because then we can pit different things together. How do we want to set up bike counters in order to reduce fatalities and better understand bicyclist and pedestrian movements in a roadway? That's very important for a certain kind of public safety, and it's also important considering how to get at different kinds of surveillance technology or surveillance technology that are coming from companies that are really privacy first, in order to preserve the other kind of public safety, the internal, mental, and emotional kind.
And Michael, I had a question for Dan, and if
Go right ahead, Mary.
just Dan, given what you're looking at for the future, given where you think technology is headed, what do you think is posing the biggest challenge then for policymakers? Because you've already talked about how some government entities are selling data. You mentioned the 77 million per year from Florida. As you look ahead 5-10 years and you really have a sense about where the technology is moving, what do you see as challenges for policymakers?
Well, I think it's keeping up with the technology. So, for example, a lot of regulations are based on personally identifiable information, or PII. And that's really an outdated concept. So if you look at where technology is going, right? So we have AI, digital assistants, and possibly robots, robotic drivers. So how do they train them? They collect massive amounts of data. So emails, what you type on your phone, videos, and they train a big deep learning model on it. And after you train this model, well, what does PII mean? So model really is just a bunch of numbers. None of those numbers are your phone number, social security number, credit card number. None of them are pictures of you. But you can take this model and you can trick it into spitting out the data it was trained on. So if there were credit card numbers, phone numbers, PII in there, you can get it. It somehow memorized it, but no one knows how. And explaining this to regulators, policymakers is not always an easy task. Or even, how do you write laws explaining that, right? So PII was a nice concept. You know what is PII or what is not, but when it's just a bunch of numbers that somehow could, if you do things in the right way, reveal secret information, how would you regulate that? And so one of the key concepts that has grown from the technical community is it's not the thing you share, it's how you produce it. So it's how you train the model or how you aggregate statistics. So it's the code that you run it through in order to produce the output. That's the important thing that needs to be regulated. And to understand that, our policymakers need to be trained in much more than just law, just different kinds of technologies as well.
So I just have one quick question, follow up to that then. Are they building privacy and data ethics into the new technologies? Is there a push to do that?
So it depends on who they is, but some companies like Apple and Google and Facebook in certain cases have started it. So for example, you may have noticed that when you type on your iPhone, you're getting some pretty good suggestions for what to type next or some emoji recommendations. And the way they do that is they collect what you type. Now, that's really creepy, right? So instead of collecting literally what you type, they add noise to it. So when the data hits their servers, they have no idea what you typed. But when you collect this over many, many, many people, the noise sort of cancels out. And you can start to say, okay, this is what people are searching for. When people type cat, this is the kind of emoji that they're interested in. So yes, a lot of companies, especially the big ones, are doing it. And they have active research teams that are improving the technology. So, but this is something that the big guys are doing. And for small startups, small companies where they don't have the resources to invest in that's where the problem could lie.
All right, thanks, Michael.
We have in Arlington County 2 proposals that impinge on privacy that have already been put into at least partial effect. One is deploying sensors in the Clarendon public space, which Jack mentioned, and another is leasing county dark fiber to our largest commercial landlord. What sort of risk analysis, cost-benefit analysis was done? And if none was done, what could be reasonably expected? And more than that, and more generally, if Costas and some of the others on the panel could speak to the concept of consent. What rights do people have to control their own private data? And do they have the right to opt out? Do they have the right to see data that is personally identifiable, even though that's an anachronistic concept I've just learned? What about, so the first question is, the process of giving away or selling information, and the second is the principle of consent. That's a lot, Costas, but I'm sure you can pick your way through some of it.
Well, first of all, this has been a great discussion, and Yo and Dan, thanks for adding to the mix that the reality of Jack has given us. You mentioned dark fiber. If you offer dark fiber to someone, you're not offering data, you're offering dark fiber, and the other person runs data through it. So we have to be slow and careful of what is it that we're concerned with. If you told me that the county was sharing data streams with someone, it's very different from leasing dark fiber. Now, the thing that happens with leasing dark fiber is someone's getting perhaps a good deal because they may not pay as much as they would have to pay to dig their own fiber ducts. But if they're just leasing fiber, it's a straight up economic discussion. It doesn't matter. We don't know what's going through. They're going to decide. The lessee is going to decide what to push through. So unless I've misunderstood the question, I think that's kind of like a non-question. But more important than that is, I think, what Yo was trying to say, which is that it's time now to redefine things, redefine public safety, redefine trust, and not look at any one thing. And I've been looking at the chat, and there seems to be really passion around a small number of issues that perhaps, Jack, you can somehow elaborate on or provide a process for. But I think what we're trying to offer here to those that are concerned about their own data, and no question that's key. You know, is somebody selling my data? There's a yes and a no answer, and I'd like to know too, and then move on. But the most important thing that I'd like to push us on is elected officials and how they're going to have to learn much more than they ever have been asked to. It's not that we expect our elected officials, be they board members or be they Congress people or senators, we don't expect them to become experts in technology, but we do expect them to understand the impact of their choice, the impact of their choice. So when that comes up, I vote for some focused and targeted discussions with elected officials before they're asked to vote on legislation. Because legislation is the law. If I don't do it, you take me to prison. That's an awesome power that we give our government. So before the law is passed, we have to make sure that the right conditions and the right knowledge was shared. And one slight example, I wonder if people know the settings on their own iPhones or different kinds of vendors, whether they know how to set their various privacy and security principles inside their phone, so that when you're walking by an antenna, the antenna doesn't suck up everything, because you've said don't allow yourself to be sucked up. So there are some simple things that we can do to help promote both to our residents and to our elected officials just what is within their power to do. There are lots of things that are within our power to do. I'm sorry, I've spoken too long, so I'll stop. Thank you.
Well, what about the principle of consent? How do we redefine these issues and get elected officials to understand the principle of consent? Anyone? Okay, let me ask one of my own questions.
Obviously, Michael, obviously it's important to you, but there's probably a lot of baggage behind that word consent, and I have no idea what baggage you're carrying. So maybe you can explain it to us.
Not really my question. I'm trying to distill from the chat, and I think consent means the capacity to opt out of the collection and sale of personally identifiable information.
This is Joshua Fair. I don't know if I'm unmuted, but that was my question, and I kind of want to clarify. What I mean is, you know, I work in the federal space, and I live here in Arlington, and I recognize a number of uses for our data that maybe I would actually allow if I had the ability to provide any type of consent over it. I recognize there's kind of a difference here on law enforcement use cases where people would want to opt out, but there are legitimate use cases that I would actually really like to opt into. And so I guess I'm mostly curious about your thoughts on sort of consent management being the consent of the use of data for things that maybe I actually really want.
I could say one bit on this. Yeah. I think it's such a great kind of open field to play in. And part of what's really feels exciting in the work that, like, I'm thinking of, like, the Consentful Tech Project, and all the organizations like that are exploring this more. It feels like there's so much positive opportunity as opposed to negative opportunity. I mean that in the sense of space, that there's a lot of opportunity for like increased sense of civic engagement and increased sense of satisfaction for people and increased sense of like positive relationship between an individual and the the governmental authority that they're sort of that's serving them through working with consent more. One thing we had played with once, is going back to like a piece of a project a little while ago, was the idea of having like data donors, which is basically an idea where people would be able to select some of the ways that they wanted the data that they're producing to be used. And so I feel like Joshua is just getting a bit at your question. I think there's a ton of sort of possibility to it, and it's sort of the direction that we all want to move, is having people be able to select how the data that they're naturally producing is helping their government. Yeah. That's it. I don't know if other people want to speak on that.
Yeah, I'd like to add one other point. I don't have a solution to it, but one issue with consent is that you get very biased data. Let's suppose you want to consent because you want to be part of a study that treats a disease that you're very interested in. So the people who would volunteer in that study are a very biased sample, and they might not accurately reflect the kind of people that, the kind of data that would be needed for statistically meaningful analysis. So consent is good, but if you consent based on the contents of your data, it creates a kind of data skew that could actually cause the data to be worse. I don't have a solution to it, but that's just pointing out that it's a complex issue.
Yeah, and the other question I think Joshua, I guess you raised a good question, is who decides? How do you decide what data is that you need consent on? Because I have different views of it than probably you do. I know we've talked to folks about medical records. If my medical record, if someone came to me and said, "Hey, Jack, we have this program where we're going to work with the fire department, emergency rescue, and what we're going to do, if you sign up for this, we'll look at your health records. So when we show up, because you call 911, we'll know exactly what your conditions are, and we can serve you better." To me, I personally would say, "Hey, where do I sign up? I'll be glad to do it." But I'm sure there were many, many people who would say, "No, I'm not going to share that type of information." So you raised a really good, interesting question, and I don't know how you decide who you apply consent to and something like that. I know in Tel Aviv, what they do is anytime data of a resident's being used, they inform the resident that they've taken the data to use it for a purpose, a government purpose, whatever. Again, that's an interesting question you ask, and also the question of whether or not we sell data. I don't know of any instances in the county, so you may know of some. I don't, but that's a good question, though.
Joshua, thank you for speaking up. Do you and Elizabeth, you're next. Joshua, do you have any follow-ups you'd like to comment on or ask the panel?
Michael, I'm sorry. I just want to point out the fact that we do have a moderated discussion tonight, and we've asked people to put their questions in the chat rather than.
Okay, I'm doing my best to synthesize, and I'm getting a lot of pushback from some people that I'm not doing an adequate job. So I thought I would allow that, but we can move on then.
Thank you.
Sure, I apologize. I'm going to ask a question, and it's about the idea of having a chief privacy officer as an elected official. And that person would have, and I'm getting no's, but that's why I'm asking. That person would have under his or her purview training, handling complaints, issuing guidances on new tech. And the reason I said elected is just because that assures some independent accountability apart from the board. Dan, you shook your head no.
Yeah, it's something to me. It becomes very political if it's an elected position, right? So ideally, you'd want a civil servant with the background and training who cares about this issue rather than caring about maintaining this particular position.
Okay, that's a fair comment. What if it was just a civil servant? Is there value in having a single person with that kind of dedicated responsibility?
Well, a single person or a group of people, but you definitely need someone with authority.
Authority to
Yes, Michael, yes, for me. I agree with the proposal if it's, and I agree totally with Daniel's rejoinder. So having, there are lots of chief somethings in government these days. So we have a chief information officer, a chief information security officer, a chief data officer, a chief privacy officer, a chief empowerment officer, a chief innovation officer. We've got lots of chiefs. Being able to focus is important, but the only proviso I would put is that it be funded to allow certain tasks to be done. You, Michael, begin to enumerate some excellent tasks. Usually, my experience in county government is that the idea is good, but it's never funded adequately. So if you venture into the direction of privacy and engagement, it's not a bureaucratic job. I think, as Yo would agree immediately, it's engaging the community, finding new ways to discuss with the community where are our metrics for privacy, where are we comfortable with, where do we get uncomfortable with. And again, we're not looking for someone to write the law and chisel the 10 Commandments in stone. We're looking for someone who engages the community in a discussion and engages the policymakers so they can write the right laws. So under those conditions, amen.
Okay, I'm getting nods from the other two, so I can move on. Go ahead. Somebody was about to speak. No? Mary, do you have
Yes?
any other questions at this point?
I was just looking at some of the questions in the chat about third-party data. So
Yeah, I
what
asked
data
that.
is current? Well, where are we in terms of what's the process then, Jack, in looking at third-party data and how that moves forward? What's our, what's the plan for this year?
Are you talking about data we share with a third party?
Yeah, the Arlington County with the third parties, right, that are specifically working with the county.
Yeah, there are a lot of peel back a lot of points to this. First of all, we have strict contracts we write, which any data we share, we specify what type of data it is we're sharing. And quite honestly, it's not anything that we review the data and we make sure that there are protections embraced in that. We've most recently, the board approved a template, a memorandum of understanding, where we could share data with certain universities that want to participate in this. And they signed an agreement, which our attorneys looked at, to make sure that any data that we give them is not sensitive and that data is protected and returned in the format that the county's asked for. Right now, we've got 3 universities, University of Virginia, George Mason University, and American University, who are participating in that memorandum of understanding. And the way it works is they'll come forth with us and say, look, we got this idea. You tell me what it might be. It might be a better way of doing fire management or whatever. And they come up with the statement of work that they want to do. And we take that to the department that's going to be sharing their data with them, and would they evaluate it? Again, looking at it from the perspective of this data we should be sharing with them, how we're going to protect it, make sure it's data we want to share. So that's an ongoing process, and that was recently approved by the board, I believe, I'd like to say in the fall. It was a memorandum of understanding with those universities, and then again, the thing is in the statement of work. Now, each of these statement of works, and we've had very few of them to start off with here, because we just passed this, but we do privacy risk assessment on it, a statement to say, okay, what data is being divulged, and is it, are we comfortable with that? And again, that's done by the data privacy officer, chief data officer, and the party that's asked for this in the department that's going to be sharing their data with them. Hope that helps.
Yeah. And is there is there a framework now for us to decide kind of what the pieces of data are in terms of the different pieces of data and how we treat them? Is there a framework where we look at that in terms of, is one more sensitive than another? I don't want to
Well,
know. I don't want to know what those cores are, but is there a?
well, as I said earlier on, I think what we've done is we've identified and mapped where the data is. The next step is to do that taxonomy that says, let's dive down and find out what that data is actually. Daniel brought up the whole question of the personally identifiable information. That's a concept that was developed years ago, and does it need to be refreshed and looked at? Probably so. But those are the types of things we'd be looking at going forward.
So Jack, can I ask you a question? So you said you review the data and you send it to universities after making sure there's no sensitive information in there. So what is to stop you from just making that public? So instead of only a certain group of researchers having access to it, make it widely available so you don't have to be, let's say, affiliated with the university or with a team of lawyers to.
We do as well, and then we put it into this data portal we have, which we just refreshed, which allows people to go in and say, if this is not sensitive and it's public available, then they can go and look at it and do an analysis on it. Sometimes universities would like bulks of data because they're doing a capstone project in the university, a research project, and they relate it to the department that they're working with in the county that may have an interest in seeing further thought done on that. And so it involves not only data, but it involves participation of the department, subject matter experts in the department to work with it. But so most certainly, if we're giving it to a university, we're making it available via our data portal as well.
I see that Takis has joined us. Thank you. I can't summarize everything that we've talked about in the last 70 minutes, but there is a common theme that I would like to ask you to address, which is there is a hunger, at least among the 40 of us who are in attendance, for more knowledge from the county on what it's doing, on the contracts it's signed, on the process by which it's signed contracts and will sign contracts, on consent, on opting out, on national security provisions. What's in place to make things more transparent, if you don't mind my ask?
And I guess this is me who is asked, right? So sorry for joining late. There was a conflict with your independent auditors committee, which among other things is also looking into how we contract things, etc. So I think that we are starting a very long conversation here on what exactly what transparency will be about, how best we can assure Arlington citizens that first of all that we collect responsibly the data, we handle responsibly their data, we make sure that there are no breaches, that we make sure that we are not vulnerable as much as possible to cyber attacks, etc. There are many layers to this, and I think that the Commission has been trying to think through this, and you will all understand that that there are parts that definitely our staff is responsible for. The board is looking forward to adopt policies to sufficiently serve the idea of transparency, without though making it impossible for staff to work, without making it impossible for Jack Belcher's department to do their work efficiently and correctly. Now, I definitely subscribe to the idea that we need to elevate our digital accountability, and that applies really to me and to my colleagues. And I think this is a great discussion to have on how we deal with digital assets as part of our governance. As we, we changed a lot of things in the few years. We literally now use cloud services all over the place for us, for you, for everybody. We are now telecommuting, etc. We have new devices. I think I stopped in, or I came in right when you were talking about innovative contracts and smart city applications, etc. So this is the start of a conversation of how best to adapt our policies so that the residents of Arlington are satisfied that they have enough transparency, that they can give useful and appropriate input to that, and that your elected officials can respond and be at the level of accountability that you want. Now, this is a very political answer. I know that. The way to that is not trivial, is not easy, but we are committed to improve as we go. One thing I want to say is, and to be very clear about that, as somebody, for myself, I've been critical for some of, on some initiatives, including the Clarendon initiative. One thing I'm really assured, I know that our staff, the county manager's office, understands the challenge. And I know that they are really responding to the idea that privacy matters, that we have to improve that, we have to think ahead, etc. They understand that transparency matters as well. So I am literally, I'm committed to make progress on that. I grew up in mostly, before I came to the United States, in a society that has a very long. I was in Germany, right? So it has a very long tradition of how this right to informational self-determination, which, by the way, it's a legal asset defined by their Supreme Court. So how this was implemented, it took literally decades to get there, but they got. So I think that we are in the same boat right now, and I think we will see good results out of that.
Thank you. Mary, I'm going to turn this back over to you in case you want
Okay.
to make any summary comments or have the panel make any final comments.
Right, and there are a couple. We did have a couple of questions. One, what for us moving in the future, and obviously it is a journey, and we've got a lot of steps to take. What surprised you most as you are engaging in building that digital trust that you've talked about? What advice do you have for us? Because obviously we are behind you in that journey. So we'd love to hear what advice you have.
Oh, I was thinking as Jack was saying too, I mean, I feel so much that Boston is constantly learning and growing in this space too. And I think we're probably in a lot of similar places on this. I think that Daki's just mentioned this too. Moving towards transparency for transparency's own sake is like I think a huge what can I say? It's a huge charge of energy because having it can create more and more community support for initiatives, I think. I'm thinking, as you're all talking about this, about all the places in Boston in which it feels like we're sometimes growing less transparent. But it feels like the more that we partner with different community organizations, the more work we've done with the Massachusetts ACLU, which has been a real leader in the space, the more that it feels like there's new pathways to transparency. I think that that we're trying to do that in the surveillance ordinance and other places, and we're trying to. The next step is to explore consent more. But I think it's always reevaluating, as Dan said earlier. The technology is changing. We're trying to stay on top of it and figure it out. So just opening up the conversation is one of the biggest things. Last part I would just say, going back to what Jack and Taki said, is that we're always trying to figure out how we can be more thoughtful and ethical in our processes without gumming up the work so much that government can't function. And that's a really important part too, right? Like, public services need to happen, otherwise people are really going to suffer. And so it's a conversation we've had with other cities too. And yeah, it'd be good to be continually in conversation on this, like, what are the sacrifices that we're willing to make of slowing things down in order to make sure that we're getting it right? And how can we open up the conversation and community more and more so external partners are making the decisions about where those sacrifices happen, because it's part of the process, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks. And Dan, I have a final question for you. It looks like in this journey, it's really important for individuals to really look for reliable information, right? And remain informed, particularly since technology is moving so fast. And you mentioned one of the tools, and I'd love for you to say that again. But what's your best advice about how people stay on top of what's impacting their daily lives? Because clearly, and as I've looked at the chat, the pace at which municipalities may go will be slower than the expectations of the residents. So could you give your perspective?
You won't like my answer. It's really, I don't know. I mean, if you come up with the answer to that, I'd love to hear it. Everything is changing so fast. There's so many more organizations, right? You have your cable provider, you have your city, your county, everything. It's so hard to keep track of everything, right? So all these different businesses that you're involved with. So I don't know. It's really a matter of education, and yeah, it's really a community effort to educate, civics, and I guess maybe regulations, so that, let's say, privacy policies are actually easy to read, and don't take up pages, right? Who actually reads them? Yeah, so it's a mess. I don't think there's any easy solution to this.
But worth looking at.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing is you can follow some of the major companies that actually do have privacy research teams. Like, what is Google doing? What is Apple doing? Apple put out a press release saying that they've adopted a while ago differential privacy, and here's what it allows them to collect, and here's how it impacts you. You could look at things like GDPR, right? So it's complicated, but they put out a nice user-friendly webpage to explain the principles. So it's, follow the big guys. They try to make it understandable, but really there's just so much out there. It's hard to keep track.
All right. Well, we are almost at the end, and I'll turn it over to the vice chair, Frank Yazzo,
Mary, can I make a
end it.
couple of quick
Sure,
comments?
Costas, go ahead.
Thank you. Just two comments, especially because Takis has joined us. I wanted to enrich a little bit the description that we heard about what the night was. I'm a little bit more of an optimist. I thought there was a great debate, and I thought I heard Arlingtonians speak about an open way to both explore and, for sure, process what's going on. There are some very strong voices in the group that I heard that have some very particular concerns, and I would make sure that I address those concerns head on. But I think in general, at least from the expert panel you gathered, the notion is innovation is good. Trying something new is good. You have to have some strict framework around it. The second thing that I wanted to say is that if you think government has problems in terms of what to do with the data, look at industry. They have 10 to 50 times the amount of processing of data. So us in government, we're very small. We're small fry. And this is why I think Daniel's suggestion of looking at the big boys might be a useful one. I don't want to forget that schools is where it starts. You have to look at K through 12 curricula that take on privacy and security for the kids. Because, I know it's not for tomorrow, but unless we start now, it'll never happen. And then finally, I just wanted to reemphasize that you should not be looking for an answer. You should be setting down a process. If this happens, what should we do? Since these voices continue to speak, how do we deal with them? You need processes more than you need strategies or written laws. And I think for Takis' sake, I absolutely endorse the idea that elected officials need to, first of all, understand more deeply the impact of laws that are being discussed. And I wouldn't rush into a privacy law right now because there's so many things that are changing. Just try to find procedures that will help you along the way. Thank you very much. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Anyone else closing? Any other comments before I turn it over to Frank? All right, Frank. Well, wrap us up, and we really do appreciate everyone coming.
Very good discussion tonight, and wanted to thank Takis Karantonis for joining us tonight, our board liaison to the Information Technology Advisory Commission. Also want to thank Angela Easterwood from the county government. She's the wizard behind the screens, keeping this whole operation going. So we want to thank Angela again. Also want to thank all of our speakers tonight, Jack Belcher, who with the county, Dr. Costas Torregas, Dr. Dan Kiefer, and Yo Deshpande for helping educate us all on this very important issue tonight. I also want to thank Sharon Valencia, Chair of the Emergency Preparedness Advisory Commission, also known as EPAC, and Mary Cornell, Chair of the Information Technology Advisory Commission, also known as the Tech Commission, or ITech, for leading the charge and putting this program together. It was a joint effort of both EPAC and the Tech Commission. And finally, we want to thank the members of both EPAC and ITAC, or Tech Commission, who joined in this effort. And finally, I want to thank the members of the public who joined us tonight. This is the beginning of an important conversation, and we hope to organize future programs on this topic as we continue the journey into Arlington's digital future. So thanks again. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
That's
Bye.
all.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank
And
you.
Angela, could you save the questions so we could have those in a FAQ? I do it in Zoom easily.
Yes, I'll do that for you. I'll get
Thank
those.
you. Thank you so much.
Last question before I leave. I'm now going to look at the recorded part of all this. So where do I find it?
Angela will be sending it to you.
I will be
tomorrow.
sending it to you. Yeah. By
Angela-
tomorrow morning, you should have it.
Much appreciated. That doesn't
No problem.
have to be. I will be able to look at this over the weekend. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Take
Thank you,
care. Thanks.
Tasha.
Thanks again, Angela, for staying
And
the
we
whole
will
time.
we will ultimately post it on both the EPAC and Tech Commission web pages. Is that right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
can.
we're going to get some help with that.
Which
Absolutely.
is even easier for me to find. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And